Good morning, everyone. My name is Elizabeth, the Education Coordinator for Marlene's Market and Deli. This morning's honored guest is Laura Matter with the Garden Hotline, and she has wonderful information to share with us today. And is always an honor to have you with us, Laura. Thank you so much.
It's nice to be here. Thanks. And happy first day of April. Can you believe it? Oh my gosh.
I sure can't. Yeah, we're already one fourth of the way through the year already.
Ugh, I,
So
I, I think that chilly spring has had us fooled that we don't think it's here yet, but everything's blooming. So it's happening.
exactly, seeing those cherry blossoms just blossom up so much joy for me. Oh, Penny said it was 37 this morning.
Yeah. Where are you, Penny?
I think, oh yes, she is in Auburn.
Yeah. Yeah. I live in Seattle, in West Seattle, and it was still, 40 something. So we're not, we're not warm enough yet.
We need more sunshine, but we can still get a jump on our spring gardening though.
Yep.
And your presentation today is preparing your edible garden for spring.
Elizabeth and I were talking about this photo and this lady strolling through the garden and how delightful that looks and how we just want to be there sitting in the sun. It just looks like a wonderful space.
It does. And she's got those raised garden beds, those little wooden boxes. At your thing, maybe you can address what is the best way to build a garden. Should it have those boxes or it should just be in the ground?
Oh, it's all up to the individual. I garden in raised beds because I have an old back injury, and so it's way easier for me. I'm happier to do it. I can pull up a chair next to my little metal troughs and just sit and poke around. And then raised beds can heat up the soil better, so that can be helpful in the spring to get the soil warmer. And they can be, you can organize things pretty well. But a lot of people garden in the ground because you can get more grown because you have bigger spaces typically. And you also have soil that's already there. You don't have to buy a bunch of soil. You don't have to buy a bunch of materials. I have also a lot of containers, so large containers that I use as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, a great question.
There's some, you're going to hear a little background noise. I hope it's not too disruptive. I'm in an old building in Wallingford. This is the Good Shepherd Center where our offices are. And I typically am at home when I do these classes, but I'm working on our garden hotline today for some of the staff that usually work Saturdays because they're all out in the field exploring gardens and working with the master composter program. So there's steam heat, old radiators, and it's making a bit of a buzz right now. And that will probably come and go, just to warn you.
I've been to the Good Shepherd school there. I was a nurse there in the Meridian School.
Oh, great. Yeah. So you know the building.
Well, I know the grounds too and how beautiful it is. And I tried to find you guys and looked around at your offices and stuff because I heard all about, your program.
We're here, we're in the, what's, really the basement, but they call it the first floor, in the south end of the building. So we have this whole sort of wing with our office and a kitchen and an education room and a business office. And then we have the children's garden directly out back of where we are. And then the adult learning garden out towards the pea patch out that way.
Nice. Do you know Mark Wilson?
I do. Worked with Mark.
I've known him for years. I'm good friends with him and his wife.
Yeah, I worked with Mark initially when he worked for Historic Seattle, when I first started working at Tilth. And then now, of course, he works for Meridian.
What a small world.
I know, right? All right. So should we start, Elizabeth?
Yes, let's go
Okay.
ahead and get started, and I will keep an eye out on that waiting.
Okay. I'm going to try which method. As I said, I'm in a different space. So let's see. Ah, good. Okay, clicking works. So this is what we're going to learn about today and talk about. And as Elizabeth said, this is interactive. We can ask questions wherever you please, and share things that you have noticed and have familiarity with, because we all learn from each other as well. So we're going to talk about the benefits of growing your own vegetables. Why would you do this thing? Take the time to do this. Choosing soil for containers, raised beds, and then amending native soils like we talked about, like in the ground beds. How to plan for what you're going to grow. So seasonality, looking at what to grow when and how to do that. And then a jump start on two things that you will be dealing with this soon, but how to outsmart pests over the course of the growing season. That's something that you may start seeing activity now, but also builds up through the season. And then seed saving, which you have to start thinking about now because you have to plan for it. So we're going to go through all of those for today. But I have a couple of quick questions for you guys. We like to survey people and gather data and just see what people already know. And then at the end, we'll ask you more about what you learned as well. So how much experience do you have in selecting plants for an edible garden? It could be none at all. You've done some edible gardening, or you have a great deal of experience. And if you want to just be verbal, or you could put it in the chat, either way. I'm trying to find the chat button. I'm not seeing it. Oh, there it is. Okay. All right, so we have a great deal, some experience, and very little, and some experience. So that's great. It's a good range. I like that. Okay, and then why do you want to grow vegetables? Why do you want to grow food?
I've been collecting seeds for years. I have every green and orange and red pepper. I save the seeds. Jalapenos, I save the seeds. I want to grow my own food so I can make sure that it's organic without, glyphosate and Roundup, and just, I don't know, I guess save money and just eat fresh and pick off the ground.
Exactly. I like what you said, pick off the ground. There's something satisfying about, just picking it and eating it and picking it and preparing it.
Well, and if there was ever a disaster, a catastrophic event, you could maybe have something, already there. You wouldn't have to worry about the shelves being empty or running to the store and, being mobbed down by people. I mean, it's just nice to be sufficient, right?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Okay. So that's helpful. Thank you. We're going to move into what I think about why. And it's a lot of what you said, of course. You can control the inputs. You can grow organically. You don't have to use pesticides, chemical fertilizers, just have healthy soil. You can save money because a lot of times if you're growing things like lettuce, a pack of seeds might cost these days, could be $5 depending on the variety, but compare $5. If you're growing lettuce all summer long, there's 1,000 seeds in a lettuce packet of lettuce seeds. So, you're not paying $4 every time you buy a head of lettuce. You pay $5 once, and then you get all of this lettuce all over the summer. And you can have extra to share. with others because there's so many seeds. You can grow extra and give it away. You can choose specific varieties. So you can find things that aren't sold in a grocery store, varieties that you like. Often we don't see things like some of the crisp head lettuces that are not iceberg, but I like iceberg lettuce. I know it gets a bad rap. I like it because I like how crunchy it is and full of moisture, and it's great in certain dishes. And there is still nutrition in it, but there are other crisp head types that are different than iceberg, and you don't ever see those in the grocery store. You'll see romaine and basically just a green romaine, but there's a lot of other kinds of romaine as well that have like spotting and striping and red leaves, lots of diversity. And so you can create a diverse garden by doing this yourself as well. And then I noticed somebody said, you know, have the pride of doing it. And that's a big part of it, you know, this sense of accomplishment. It's pretty exciting, you know, to put a plant, you start a tomato from seed, you grow it up through the spring, put it out in the garden, it grows up, and then you get this crop of fruit that you get to harvest. And you did that all by yourself from one little seed. And then the relaxation and creativity of the process, that's a big part of it for me. I like to grow lettuce a lot, and I eat a lot of lettuce. Sometimes I'm driven more by how pretty a lettuce is compared to maybe what it tastes like, and I'll find out what it tastes like. And if I'm not thrilled, I'll get a different type next year. But I'm often looking at what's really beautiful and all the different colors. And I like that part of it. So for me, creativity is a big aspect of it. And then there's tons of health benefits. So gardening is pretty diverse in what you're doing. When you're working in the garden, you're doing a bunch of different things. You're raking, you're digging, you're pulling, you're, you know, watering, shoveling, all these things have different muscles that you use. You're walking around a lot, you're walking back and forth, you're squatting, you're kneeling, sitting. So it's a full body workout. And when I used to do landscape maintenance, I had my own business for a long time, and I would have a job where you know, it's fall, there's tons of leaves to rake. So I'd start in one corner of the garden and I would rake the leaves there, and then I would weed, and then I would put mulch down, and then I'd move to the next thing. And that kept me moving and not doing repetitive exercise. So there's really wonderful benefits to that. Being outside, getting enough vitamin D, which is, you know, a challenge in our climate during the winter. It's pretty cloudy, but if you can get out on those sunny days and poke around in the garden, you know, you can get some sunshine. And then definitely during the summer, you're getting that. Being exposed to different bacteria can help build your stronger immune system. And then also there are some qualities of soil that can help relax you, so that breathing those in actually have effects on your body. You can be mindful and focused about a task that you're doing, and that helps to sort of calm you down. It brings stress reduction along with that, because you're not trying to think of 10 things at once. And as I mentioned, it's a creative outlet. So a lot of people, you know, will create a garden that has espalier apple trees. So it creates this beautiful fence, and they take great pride in pruning those properly. And then, you know, you could have a bunch of flowers growing at the base of the tree that look really beautiful, but are also perhaps edible. And so you can combine all these useful qualities with a beautiful garden as well. All of this reduces the production of cortisol in our bodies, which is, you know, a stress hormone, and that's helpful. And then, of course, what most of you said to begin with is it produces this healthy organic produce that you can eat. So you're eating better, you're eating fresh. Vitamins are more readily accessible, and minerals, because you're eating it immediately and it's not sitting in a store somewhere or being trucked. So we start with soil. Soil's kind of the key to everything. Healthy soil will drain well. It nourishes your plants, and it does not introduce toxins into the garden. Soil is habitat. It needs to be fed over the years. of you growing things in it. And some of the things we do to improve soil health are adding compost and growing cover crops. This isn't always necessary, and we're going to go into that a little bit. But one of the points I want to make about soil is that the point of it being habitat is that all of the microorganisms and macroorganisms in the soil are helping to feed your plants. And as we look at what soil is, natural soil over time takes thousands of years to build soil. And so when we're buying products from the store, which we'll look at a little bit, these are made up things. They're not true soil, but we can use them as a growing medium. But soil technically is a combination of mineral matter, organic matter from living organisms, air, and water. And you have to have all four of those things in there for that to qualify as actual soil. And then you have micro and macro organisms that live in the soil. And these are the creatures that are actually helping to continue to break down organic matter. And they access that and interact with plant roots and help to feed the plant. So some of the macroorganisms, like a worm, they're not obviously doing anything with the roots, but they are creating air spaces in the soil, and they're helping to continue to break down organic matter. And then they have their waste products, which become nutrient rich, which then can be available to plants. But some of the microorganisms, actually, some of the fungal colonies, in fact, have relationships where they interact with root systems, where they inject into the root system, and they are exchanging nutrients because they can't photosynthesize and create sugars for themselves. Plants do, but plants also need those minerals out of the soil. So they're kind of trading. It's a little trade deal that they have going on. Some of them just wrap around the root and then they absorb through the root, the skin of the root. So there's a relationship going on here. And it's important for us to keep that healthy. We think about that when we feed birds, or we want to have butterflies or bees in our garden. That's very natural to us. It's above ground. We see it. We visibly see the interactions. But I want you to think about the same thing that's going on under the ground, that you are a host and creating habitat as well. So it's really important to think about how we prepare soil in the spring. It's crucial to maintain soil integrity. And I put this picture in here because this is like some very thick clay soil, and you can see what happens. It gets compacted, the water can't drain. This soil would need to be broken up with compost to get it into a usable state. Clay particles are very, very small and tight, and they just bind together very closely. And then if you have sandy soil, you have a lot of leaching that goes on because the water doesn't stay in place. But important point in the spring, and this spring in particular, is to be careful about working your soil until it's not too wet. My backyard has underground springs in the hillside behind my gardening area, and I am just now able to sort of walk around in there. And that's one of the reasons I grow in raised beds. If I were to depend on the ground, it's clay soil, I'd have to improve it. It stays saturated for months, and I probably wouldn't even be able to plant in it until May. So I have perennials in the ground that go in the summer, and I don't bother with putting annual things in the ground, so I don't have to worry about it. When you're testing your soil, you can take it and create a ball and then sort of pack it down and toss it in the air. If it falls apart, you're ready to go. If it stays in a ball and stays clumped together, then it's still too wet. So you want to be able to wait until that soil's dry enough to be able to turn it. If you start working in it too soon, you're creating compaction, which can take years to undo. So be careful about that. Raised bed gardens have less issue with this because we're putting specialized soil mixes in them. You want to test your soil. So this is a good time to test to see if you really do need any nutrients. Do you need organic matter? You can have such a thing as too much organic matter. It's typically what we're looking for is about 5% organic matter in the soil, but a lot of gardens have more than that. I just did soil tests with some folks at a school garden and they have 13%. We've tested our gardens here at the Good Shepherd Center and the Adult Learning Garden years ago when, you know, our convention was to just keep adding compost every year. And it was something like 22%, super high. And what happens when you have too much organic matter is the way that all the minerals and nutrients interact, they're elements like that you would see on the, you know, periodic table of elements. They have a charge, and they can bind to organic matter and then become unavailable. So you may think you have enough of everything you need in the soil, but it's not available to plants because it's tightly bound chemically to the soil. So soil tests can be really useful. The King Conservation District in King County, for almost all cities, there's a few cities that don't pay into the taxes that go into that program. And they are a nonprofit. They are not a city or a county agency, but they do this work in behalf of the counties. They have a free soil test for King Conservation District where you can look at nutrient matter and or nutrient content in organic matter. You can also look at toxins. If you pay a little bit extra, they will do a little bit of a toxin panel. Some areas like Federal Way, where Marlene's Market is, have been impacted by the Tacoma smelter plume that was pouring out smoke for 100 years, and it covered the areas around the Puget Sound in the South Sound with the fallout from that. And that included things like lead and cadmium and arsenic. And you can learn more about that through the Dirt Alert program. And you can look at maps to see where the worst pollution is. But those are also great places to just use a raised bed. For that reason alone, you don't have to worry about the soil and the contamination in it. In general, we want to minimize disturbance to maintain a good soil profile and habitat for organisms. You know, typically people, you know, we have historically just gone in and dug the garden up or rototilled it. That's not always necessary. Once you get a good garden, you know, if you're trying to establish a garden, you may want to rototill it first to sort of create a mixed layers. And then you maintain that, and you do that by growing things in it. If you need to cover it in the winter, you grow cover crops. If you need, and then during the summer, you just grow your crops. And then you can assess for nutrient need. A lot of times, all that's needed is a little nitrogen. We have a lot of phosphorus in our soils naturally. And the other thing that you'll see often in a soil test is a need for lime because our soils are acidic. The rain actually moves nutrients down through the soil profile into lower regions in the soil where plants can't access it. And so we get acidic soils on top, and adding lime can help that. So lime and nitrogen are typically what you're going to see in a soil test as recommendations for additions. And especially with growing vegetables and leafy vegetables that need a lot of nitrogen to maintain the green leaves that they grow. You can warm your soil by laying floating row cover or burlap over beds just to, you know, get some insulation on them. And then, so if soil's still cool, then you can manage that. And then adding that compost if needed based on your soil tests. And I would say if you've been adding compost for a lot of years, you know, you may not need to do a soil test, just assume that you can give it a pause. So this is what you're going to see on a soil test. You can see this percent of organic matter over here, 6%. That's not bad. That's pretty good, actually. It's got a 5.6 pH, which is a bit low. We're looking to get closer to 7, which is neutral. Typically, our soils don't do that naturally. You have to manipulate them. But, you know, if you can get it up into the 6 and above range, you're going to do better because the vegetables prefer a higher pH. And then there's some recommendations that they give you here. Here they're asking you to use dolomite lime instead of agricultural lime. Dolomite lime also has some magnesium in it, so that's going to boost your magnesium a little bit here. You can always pretty much expect to see a low nitrogen reading, especially if you're doing your tests right now because you grew in it last summer. And then it's less important to worry about all these. You can add, these nutrients will come in naturally. They're kind of in the background soil, but also if you're using a mixed fertilizer, you end up adding that. But there's their recommendations. They want to grow vegetables and they're asking you to add a few of these things to figure it out. They will, when you do a KCD soil test, it's coming from A&L Western, and they have a rate either by acre or by 1,000 square feet. You want to pick the 1,000 square foot rate so you don't have to do the conversion, because you don't need to know how much per acre if you have a 100 square foot bed. So if you are going to condition your soil with compost, first of all, there's multiple ways to do it. You can turn it in, you can add it as you're planting, you can cover the whole bed and just mulch it, and then the soil organisms will help you work that in. And when you do some planting, you'll be mixing it in. So you don't have to go to great lengths to actually, turn it in. Here's a gardener in one of the pea patch systems turning his soil, and this was the convention, but what he's turning in is cover crop. And his didn't grow super tall, but what he's doing is just flipping it. And then that's going to all decompose underneath and become part of the soil. When you go to buy compost, you can buy it bulk, like, piles of it. But typically for most of our garden spaces, we don't need that much, and you can buy different kinds of bagged compost. So you're looking at compost from Cedar Grove, which of course comes from our municipal compost systems. And this is all everybody's yard waste and food waste that gets made into compost. They are a certified organic product. You can see that by this label. And then you can see that label here also in the G&B composted chicken manure that's been tested. So both of these are tested products to make sure they meet organic standards. And then the compost industry itself has huge levels of standards they have to meet to make sure that they're making a good product. Black Gold is also, you'll find lots of bagged soils from this company, and you can read the ingredients to see what's in them. Garden compost and Cedar Grove, these are typically yard waste based. The Cedar Grove product has primarily the waste products that we put in the system. Things like other commercial companies like Black Gold may have like some timber industry waste. So they may have wood waste in here, and you can look at them to determine which compost is preferable for what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve. If you have really clay soil, something like Black Gold or some of the Gardner and Bloom products can have a lot of wood products in them, and those can be really great for helping to break up wood soil because you're adding a whole bunch of organic matter to that clay to try to break that up. Chicken manure has one of the highest nitrogen contents. So if you need nitrogen, you're actually fertilizing at the same time as you're adding this composted organic matter to the beds. Then we have mulching. So mulching goes along with protecting soil and with composting. It's sort of a passive way to compost in a way, because you're spreading organic matter on top of the soil that over time will break down and the soil nutrients will take in. There are different kinds we're going to look at in a sec, which work better for a vegetable garden, but tree and shrub beds, wood chips are fabulous because they contain live parts of the tree. They do contain some of the bark too, but basically it's like the whole tree. And you have all these different nutrients that are going to be released from that. So lots of good stuff in there. But mulch will conserve moisture. It will moderate soil temperature in the winter, keeps it warmer. In the summer, it keeps it cooler. It helps prevent weeds. So this is important as you're trying to grow things, to not have to be weeding all the time. It can make a nice finished look, even in a veggie garden, and it creates habitat for beneficial insects and birds. So things like ground beetles are great baby slug and slug egg eaters. So they like to have some leaf litter, some wood chips, or places they can hide because they don't sit out in the open. So they kind of like sit in the edges and then come out into the garden beds and get their meals, and then they go back and hide again. In some farm systems, they're actually putting in what they call a beetle bank, which is a row. If you have a farm that's doing row crops and you have, say, all your chard in rows, you interrupt that with one row that's filled with native grasses and often has a little bit of a mound to it. And that's where the beetles live. And they've been able to study that and show that that's actually effective. And so they know how far apart to put these in order to sort of create this home for your helpful allies to live in. And it's pretty cool to think about. It's like a little fairy tale. So here's some types of mulch that we use typically in gardens. Leaves, straw, and grass primarily. You can use compost. It does not keep weeds down as well as these other things will, because these are not at the composted state that compost is. They do inhibit weeds from growing, whereas compost is actually so broken down that it's now becoming more of a growing medium. But you can save leaves in the fall, put them in bags. Like if you have a dry garage, you can put them in yard waste bags in the garage, the paper ones, and just save them. Or you could put them in a plastic bag. They'll decompose a little bit. They'll get some leaf mold. All of that's really great. You're actually inoculating your garden with all that when you lay it back out. It's not harmful, it's helpful. And then you can use straw, but you want to be sure you're using organic straw, because straw comes from the base of cereal grains that are being grown across the state. And sometimes some growers actually use Roundup to knock down their grains, and that gets then into the straw. And then there's other weed killers that are employed in grain growing. So you want to make sure your straw is organic so that you're not introducing pesticides, herbicides in particular, which will kill your plants. Straw is great for, it shows it around tomatoes here. A dark colored mulch like dark leaves would be ideal for tomatoes because that absorbs more heat, but straw is great for plants that like the soil a little cooler in the summer because it reflects the light. You can use your grass clippings, just spread them out so they don't clump up too much. Anybody who's had a pile of grass clippings sitting around knows how that can be really smelly because they're so full of nitrogen. They start to decompose anaerobically and there's no oxygen in it. And then you get that sort of slimy, smelly grass, green globs. But you can spread it out. It's just, it's a wonderful mulch. It'll turn brown eventually. And then, as I said, soil organisms are working on all of these and helping to move them into the soil. So where do you find this stuff? So the mulches, you can get wood chips through places like Chip Drop. You can talk to arborists in the neighborhood. You can buy them. And then things like leaves you can collect, and the straw you're going to look at like feed stores and places like that for straw. But looking for like bagged products or bulk products of both other kinds of mulch and then soil. These are some of the things that are in the South Sound area. And I just left them on here since we're talking with Marlene's Market today. But there are lots of places all across King County and Pierce County, Snohomish County, where you can buy these products. The gardens, garden and hardware stores, nurseries, garden centers, Fred Meyer's, even places like Lowe's and Home Depot sell products like this. They're pretty easy to find. You see them at some of the Carpenitos products are even at places like QSC. They're everywhere. So not hard to find. And as I mentioned, as you're looking at the type of compost you want, just look at the ingredients on it and see if that's what you're looking for. Different things. You can also grow your own mulch and living mulch, and then that becomes compost that as you dig it into the garden. So we call this a living mulch. This is usually cereal grains and the pea family plants, and you get the seed, and this is for fall planting. This was a garden we were working with a group in central Seattle for quite a few years. and they moved out of the building now. So we don't work on these garden beds anymore, but we had a mix of rye and vetch in here, which are the two plants you see on either side. And you see how they grow together. The grass grows up, the rye kind of winds itself around. It has a little tendrils like peas do, and it grabs onto the grass. This made a complete cover for these very shallow beds to protect them so that we didn't lose a lot of nutrient out and just sort of washing off into the sidewalk and street. And then this is a different year where we grew 3 different types of cereal grain in those beds, and look how tall that got. It was a great year for cover crop, but this is too much material for that short bed. So we ended up knocking a bunch of it down and saving it. And we had beds, if you went around the corner here and went up the hill, we had other beds up there we did not cover crop that had some winter crops and also burlap on them. So we used that and we just laid it out in those beds as mulch for until we started planting. This is a little garden that we work with in the South Lake Union area, and an apartment house that has a garden on one of the balconies on like the 4th floor. These are small little beds, but we were able to do a cover crop in them. And then you turn them under. This bed on the right is the same as this tall bed after the grass was cut down. And then we just flipped this over, and then that decomposes, takes a few weeks, and then all the nutrients become available, everything breaks down and you can start planting. So the nutrients that we're most concerned about in a garden are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and NPK on this element chart. And nitrogen helps to build leaves and structure of all of the photosynthetic components and cells that are taking in light and converting it to energy. The bigger the leaf, the greener it is, the more chlorophyll production is going on in there, and the more nitrogen you're going to need. So things like collards, broccoli, cabbages, all those really big green, dark green leafy vegetables need a lot of nitrogen. Phosphorus is good to develop flowers. So with your tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, all those. It also helps to maintain the integrity of the genetics of the plant, and it helps to build strong roots. So think of it in sort of as the bones of the plant, what it's actually building to hold itself up, to anchor in the soil, to transfer nutrients, that kind of thing. And then potassium really helps integrity of the plant, to make the cell walls strong. It helps to synthesize proteins and carbohydrates. So helps to feed, keep the plant fed. It also can help to maintain the underside of the leaf where the little openings are that open up, the stomata that open up and close to let the plant breathe and let gas exchange happen. And so all of these are super important. And when you look at fertilizers, normally what you're seeing is usually a number that says something, showing you the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Like this fish fertilizer is primarily nitrogen. So if you're just looking to do some nitrogen feeding, that's a good choice. You can find some kelp meals as well, either in the powdered form or liquid. They're much smaller, but they have a ton of micronutrients. These are really good for transplant shock, or for when a plant is stressed. And you can buy these vegetable granular mixes that have all 3 ingredients in them that are formulated for generically for vegetables. Again, you're looking for this OMRI label, which lets you know that it's been tested and approved for organic production. So this is what farmers, need in order to have organic crops. They have to use organic fertilizers and materials. And this is a nonprofit that tests products, in particular products for like homeowners, people like us. And then if you're looking just for one type of ingredient, you can find that in lots of different ways. So these are all natural ingredients. Some of them are minerals, some of them are organic matter. Cottonseed meal is often used with plants that like a little bit more acidic soil. So you'll see this used as the nitrogen source often in rhododendron fertilizers. The lime is what you use to help bring your pH numbers up. Green sand can add potassium, phosphorus with the bone meal, and then blood meal is nitrogen, and it's just pretty much just nitrogen. And then the kelp meal again has those low numbers with those micronutrients. So there's tons of stuff out there. It can be a little overwhelming. Basically, you just want to know what is it you really need, and you don't need to buy the rest. And if you don't want to go that far, a good balanced fertilizer like I just showed you in the other slide will work just fine. They're not that high. Organic fertilizers break down and feed the soil organisms, who then in turn feed the plants, as opposed to directly feeding a plant. So chemical fertilizer, you're going to see numbers like 20, 20, 20 on there, and you'll know the difference. So you don't see things usually higher than 10. The blood meal here, this is high for nitrogen, which is why it's a good choice if you really need some nitrogen in your soil. So this is just a little brief entry into picking plants. We know that vegetable gardens need 6 to 8 hours of direct sun daily. You can get away with less. There are certain plants that will grow in lower light settings, like some of the leafy greens. They're not going to be as green. They're not going to be as big. You won't get as big of leaves. They won't grow as big a plant, but you still can produce things. But you would want to avoid things that flower and need to set fruit. In settings that are too shady, because you won't get much off of them. They'll just be green growth, and you may get a couple tomatoes. Doesn't have to be all at once. It can be over the course of the day. My backyard's like that. I get morning sun, and then parts of it shade, and then I get this later day sun, and then get really late day sun. And so the sun comes from 3 different places during the whole course of the day. There are things that work in the shade, like mint is great for shade. Parsley will grow in shade, chives even will. And then the leafier greens can tolerate that. So when you're deciding what to grow, part of it depends on when you want to work in the garden. So now is when cool season plants are going in. They can be going in directly as starts that you already started. They could be going in as seeds that you're putting in the ground, or starts you're buying from a nursery or a plant sale. And then you just set them out. They're tolerant of cooler soils. They're tolerant of cooler air temperatures, in particular at night. And one of the ones that people don't often realize is tolerant of cool weather is cilantro. We think of it as, people I think tend to think of it as a hot weather plant, because we think of it as going with salsas and with Mexican food. And so we tend to think of that being something you have to wait, but you can put cilantro out right now, it's fine. And then we have the warmer season plants, and you can see a little bit of difference just in these pictures. They're usually the fruiting plants. There are things that need warmer soils, often at least 50 degrees, but 60 is ideal and above, to be able to grow and really thrive. So squashes, cucumbers, peppers, tomatoes, eggplant, tomatillo. And then you can also see that sort of repeated in this chart of seed germination optimum temperature. So here's minimums. So you can see like a bean needs it to be 60 degrees, but cabbage only needs it to be 40. And then, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Just trying to move you guys' pictures around. And then lettuce is one of the lowest tolerant temps. Ideally, it can grow in this wide range. So the warmer the soil, the faster it's going to come up, but it's still going to germinate at lower temperatures. And then the optimum is really the 75. We're not going to see these hot temperatures as often in the Northwest. So fortunately, we have this good optimum range that works for us. And the way you find that out is by looking at the WSU Ag WeatherNet current conditions map. It's measuring air temperature, it's measuring, humidity and dew point and a bunch of stuff, but you can actually choose to look at soil temperatures. And there are official monitors around Puget Sound. And I think the closest one to the south to Federal Way is probably Puyallup. And so this is the Puyallup station, and this weather monitor is like capturing all this information, and it will tell you what the soil temperature is. So the soil temperature at the point where we took this picture, it was 69.9. So, you know, this was probably in the summer and soil's doing pretty well, and you can, you know, plants are growing fine. There's no worry about that. But it's also, this is a way to see, you know, if you have a plant that's cool tolerant and the soil's warming up, you can make sure you have some mulch on it so it doesn't get too hot for it, because hot soils can, you know, dehydrate a plant too. And as our climate changes, you know, we have to sort of monitor this and see what our norms are going to be for a while. But these are really fun to look at. You can like look at all the different weather stations. In Seattle, there's only one that's at the Center for Urban Horticulture. I'm in West Seattle, so there's going to be some microclimate change differences between my neighborhood and CUH, but still it gives me a baseline to figure out what to do. To choose your crops, these are really great resources. One of them, of course, is the Tilth Garden Guide. It's been around for years, Maritime Northwest Garden Guide. Set up as a monthly calendar. So you can look this month and say, I can plant the seed directly outside. I can plant the seed inside in a pot and then plant it out in this month. Or I can put this out under a cloche because I'm warming up my soil when I do that. The Growing Food in the City brochure comes in a bunch of different languages, but there's one English language brochure that has, they shortened the language versions just to get the pertinent points out. And this comes in about 19 languages, I think. We added 4 for the garden hotline work that we do. SPU actually created those for us because we were meeting people in King County that weren't in the city of Seattle's regular list of languages. So we added a few, but there's an English version. They're all available online. If you go to the Garden Hotline website, you can get to any of the brochures. If you want to buy the garden guide, you can come through Tilth, or you can find it in tons of nurseries as well. Also in the libraries. So if you just want to borrow it to peek at it, we all keep versions on our desk. We all have old versions and the new versions, and everybody references it still because it's super helpful. Also a seed packet will give you tons of ideas. And so here's cilantro. They're touting that it's a heat tolerant variety because this is a cool weather crop. And so it all leads with that, grows best in cool weather. And it grows best planted directly in the garden. So you don't really need to sow this as a plant. It's very fast. So it's going to come up pretty quickly. And then it's gonna, let's see, does it have days to harvest on this one? Not sure that it does, but most seed packets will tell you, you know, in 30 days, you're going to get a crop. And so if you're planting cilantro, you know, you don't really need to pamper it. You just put it in the garden, you let it grow, and you harvest it. I am one of those people that gets that soapy flavor from cilantro. So I personally don't eat it a lot. I'll eat it if it's in food that's prepared already. I don't hate it, but it's not my preference, and I don't cook with it on purpose, but I do plant it. And I plant it because it grows so fast and easy. You can put it in little pockets. It's a small plant. It gets these beautiful white flowers on it. It's part of the carrot family. It gets these little white flowers on it that attract tons of pollinators and beneficial insects. And then it goes to seed. And I do like coriander. So I collect the seed and I can use it to eat, or I let them drop and let it regrow. So you can do this all summer long. Just keep going with crops of cilantro. But remember that the packets themselves have a ton of information on them to tell you how to work with them. So here's some examples. So lettuce, you can plant it directly outside from April through August. Even in March, if your soil is not too wet, you can be getting lettuce out in March. March, April, even May, you're watching for slugs because slugs are going to love this stuff. So you want to be either putting slug traps in with beer or yeast water, or you bait with the iron phosphate based slug baits. You can also start them inside and then plant them out. So, you know, a lot of times people will seed and they'll also have some plants started and they'll put both in the garden at the same time. And now you have staggered sowings. We call that succession sowing. That allows you to have lettuce coming on at different times, because if you've planted this all at once, that's a lot of lettuce. You're eating a lot of salad all at once, and you really want it to be coming on for the whole season. So here's again the temperature range that we're working with. These are things you can plant now from seed. You can see a lot of these are root crops, but a lot of leafy things can be going in the garden from seed now. All of these, this is very short season. Radishes, carrots, and beets take much longer. Carrot and beet both have greens. Well, all three of them have greens that you can eat. They're edible, so you can count that as part of your crop. I make pesto from radish leaves because it's nice and spicy. I don't eat carrot greens because I don't like the taste, and I react to things like chervil. It makes my mouth feel a little numb. So I'm like, no, I'll just eat the root of that one. But I love beet greens, especially when I grow them myself because they're so tender. So you can put them in by seed. Here's some other things. Cabbages, these are going to take a lot longer. Cabbage are a long-term investment in the garden and they take up space. Kale's a little quicker, but they can overwinter and you can have them until the next season. And then of course, lettuces and all the other kinds of greens like spinach and chard and amaranth and tons of different things. And then right now we're just sort of like getting into that window where hopefully you have already done this, but if you haven't, you still have time. You want to be starting the hot weather crops that flower and fruit indoors, because we're going to be planting them outdoors later. So this is okra and bell pepper and a hot pepper and a long purple eggplant, tomatoes. Seattle is a tomato town, even though we are in this northern climate. So here's an example of growing tomatoes in February. You can get them started, March, even now. You can put them under lights. Mine, I just have in a window and they're getting stretchy and long. Once I put them into little pots, I can start putting them out during sunny days and bring them in at night, and they will plump up and get more robust. And then, you know, if you're doing a great job, you're going to have these wonderful starts that you can start putting out in May. So in this season, in this climate, we can get tomato out in May. If it's early in May, you may need to protect it from nighttime temperatures. And so you may be using things like cloches. You know, you can put water bottles or build a frame cloche. You can use those wall of waters that are commercially available that they look like little tents over the plant, and you fill each tube with water, and that gathers solar radiation during the day and then warms up the air around the plant at night. So those are pretty cool little products. You can also use things like floating row cover, or Remay as a brand name, over plants that are a little more delicate. So even things that people are planting right now, like lettuces, some of them, you know, might benefit from a little Remay over them at night, just because it's still been so cold at night. We have a bunch of plants growing in our greenhouse at the Rainier Beach farm, and these are plants that my program grows to give away. It's a culturally relevant plant start program. So, you know, we still have, you know, what people would consider sort of average plants like lettuce and collards and kale and all that stuff. But we have some little pepper, tomato, hibiscus seedlings. I'm trying to think of what else that's warmer that's up right now. And we actually just put Remay over them last night in the greenhouse because it's so chilly still. And it's not a heated greenhouse. So we started them on heat mats, moved them into this greenhouse, and on a sunny day, it's nice and warm in there, but we're trying to protect them. So Remay can warm air temperatures a few degrees underneath them and protect things. Well, you're going to go to all this trouble. You need to prevent pests. So you want to think about, this is where you put your thinking hat on, where you become sort of a investigator, I like to say. So if you're investigating how to take care of your plants properly, you need to know a lot of things about all of the other critters that live in the garden that might have effects on your plants. So which pests and diseases do you see the most? What are the plants that you're seeing them on? When do you see them? Aphids could come on early and strong. They usually start to be present when new growth is appearing because there's more sugars in the new growth of the plant, and that's what they're attracted to. The more you fertilize something like a rose in the spring, the more new growth, more aphids potentially you could get. And so there's a relationship there that you can manage by not over fertilizing something because you're just increasing your pest problem. How bad is the problem? Can you tolerate it? Or what's the easiest way to deal with it? It might be something like squishing the aphids or spraying them off with water instead of using a bunch of pesticides. What are your most common weeds? Which weeds are the most problematic for you? Typically, these are weeds that have maybe multiple ways of propagating themselves. They may have underground stems. They may have overground stolons like a strawberry does, like buttercup, for instance, and they just take off. I have tons of buttercup in my backyard. It's wet. Once the sun starts hitting it, those things get huge, and they're bigger than some of my other plants that I'm trying to grow on purpose. And then learning about like their life cycles. When are they most vulnerable? When should you be dealing with them? Pesticides aren't always the answer, even things like oil and soap-based pesticides, which are safer for us to use. And then really you want to learn how to prevent those problems. So like I said, don't over fertilize. Maybe you got mulch down to keep the weeds down. Different things you can do to help deal with that. So know your tools. Mechanical methods of preventing or managing pest issues are really wonderful, like that remay. That can be put over things to cover them to keep insects from flying in and laying eggs on them. It can also make a haven for slugs. So you have to know what the effect is going to be in order to manage that. You could have cultural controls where you're pruning a certain way or you're staking a certain way. You're putting it in the right place. You're putting it in the sun instead of the shade, those kinds of things. And then the biological management techniques are things like we all, think about when we garden, like lady beetles. They sell a lot of these insects. You don't have to buy them. They are there naturally. You want to cater to them, build a garden that will attract them, and always use those pesticides. As I said, even the organic and soil-based products, these are still going to harm lady beetles and other beneficial insects. Usually your predator insects have a smaller population than your prey. So aphids are born pregnant. They produce, millions of insects, whereas a lady beetle has a smaller set of young that she's producing. And so it takes them a while to catch up to get all that prey taken care of. So here's examples of the mechanical tools like the floating row cover that can help warm the soil. It can help keep things like the imported cabbage worm butterfly from flying in and laying her eggs on here, which is one of the biggest pests of things in the cabbage family. Those are those little green worms. They're caterpillars. They grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And they pupate on the plant, and then they become that little white butterfly with sort of a little greenish tint that flies around from April to October and has multiple generations. So you can prevent that. You may not be able to look at your beautiful plants all season long, but you're going to have some pretty nice looking plants. You can put plastic mulches down that help warm soil. In this case, this is also being used to help the tomato produce more because this red mulch is reflecting light up into the plant, which will help it flower better and get more tomatoes on it. But it keeps the weeds down, warms the soil, and can be really useful, keeps the soil moisture in. You just have to have places to water. And then with weeds, this tool, I love this tool because I can pull dandelions and cat's ears and things like that out of areas I don't want them. I am fairly tolerant of dandelion in certain areas because it's a good early bee food and it's edible and useful, but I let them bloom and then I take the seed heads off so I don't have them spreading, and my neighbors don't like that. But I'm somewhat tolerant of things in the lawn. Cat's ear is one of, I'm not, those are those flatter dandelion-like looking things with the hairier leaves, and those guys just sort of take over. So, you know, you're going to choose your battles too as to what's important for you to manage. And then with cultural methods, onions don't like growing with a bunch of other stuff. They like clean soil around them. They often don't even like mulch. So this is a great thing to know, you know, keep this weeded, keep it open, water deeply, let it dry a little in between. You know, you're taking care of this. The sun is getting to the soil, it's warming up, the onions are growing well. Also, getting them planted now is important, especially if you want a bulb on them. If they're not a green onion, if they're going to be a bulbing onion, this looks like, might be even garlic, but anything in this family that needs to create a bulb, you need them in early so the tops will grow a lot. You need lots of leafy growth in order to build a bigger bulb, and they're nitrogen hungry. So just like collards and broccoli and all that. How you prune a tomato can help to combat if it's going to get blight on it. You'll have less incidence of it. You have airflow through the plant, and you have sun for the plants to, the fruit to actually produce. And then the fun part is biological management. And as I said, you can buy things, but you can also just create a garden that's going to attract the right critters to your yard. So something, a lot of wildflowers, add flowers to your vegetable garden. They don't have to be in a separate area. They can be mixed right into where you have your plants. Chickadees feed their young insects only, and so they're active right now. So they're going to be busy like picking out like all the little insects that are flying around and trying to get into your plants. Hoverflies, this is not a bee, it's a hoverfly, are great predators. They lay their eggs on plants where there's insect issues, like where there's lots of aphids, and then the larvae are very voracious and they'll run around and eat all of the aphids. And then the adult fly is a pollinator, so it comes in and collects pollen and spreads it throughout the garden. So really great little friends and allies to know about, learn about, encourage, you know, investigate what's already happening in your garden. And then, you know, your best method of keeping things at bay is just prevention. So you want to know about the pests that you're going to see. You want to know when they're coming so you can get ahead of them. You want to know which ones to look for. You want to be able to identify good insects so that when you see eggs on a plant, you can figure out if it's lady beetle eggs or the eggs of this guy, which is the imported cabbage worm butterfly. Now, this is a butterfly. It does pollinate. It is cute. It flits around in your garden in the summer. You know, you see it from April to October and it's present. But it's laying eggs that are going to eat your plants. Most butterflies do, so that's how they work. You know, even a swallowtail will lay eggs on something like a fennel plant, an anise swallowtail, because that's what they eat. So their caterpillars need to eat things, so you have to have some tolerance to that. But this guy is just really productive, and so it has tons of young, and they get all over your plants and they eat what you're trying to eat. So you want to be ahead of them, cover them, or be looking for those eggs so you can destroy them before they even hatch. Keep that diversity of flowers in your garden. Plant for multiple season bloom for all year if you can. Part of what you're doing in the wintertime is hosting Anna's hummingbirds, which are great insect eaters and pollinators. Be tolerant of some of the useful weeds and know which those are and what they do. Things like plantain, which grows in a lawn, is actually a really great herb to grow and dry and make into a salve. Really good for your skin. And then just avoid pesticides, period. Most of the times you don't need them. It's very rare that you really need to spray a chemical, even soap or oil. Often this could be something like a really bad infestation on a tree that you need to get ahead of, that's covered in aphids and dripping sugar water everywhere. And then planning for seed saving. So this is our last section. So you have all this stuff growing in your garden. you want to choose some things you want to save for seed. You have to know a bit about, how to do that. But the first thing you need to know is that you're going to choose your best specimen. Whoops, geez, sorry, clicking too much. Because you want the best genetics of the plant that you're going to replicate. So you're going to sometimes have to sacrifice a plant. Not always, it depends on what you're saving and how you save it. So like a tomato, it doesn't matter, although you might pick the biggest fruit off of it, but you'll still have lots of other fruits as well. You have to use open pollinated plants. Because in a hybrid, when you're using a hybrid plant, it's not going to come true to seed. So open pollinated plants are a must, and we'll talk about that in a second. So why do we want to save seed? And we have a seed saver in the class, and you can chime in anytime to tell us what you do. But, big thing is you can save money. A packet of seed costs a lot less than a bunch of plants. You can choose varieties that did well in your garden. So you are building a genetic a genetic line of plants that will be successful in your garden because they do well there. You can choose varieties that you loved, and you won't have to worry about trying to find them again. And in the process, then you're preserving genetic diversity. You can allow some things to cross-pollinate to find new varieties like lettuces. And then you're also letting these things go through their maximum bloom cycle. You're not cutting them. You're not trimming them when they're half dead. You're letting them be maximum in time, and there's more food for bees out there then. So here's what an open pollinated plant is. It's a plant who has a parent that will, when you collect the seed of, it doesn't matter if it's the plant next to it or the other one, if they're the same variety, it's going to come true to seed. So unless you've let it cross-pollinate, but if you've kept it away from other things and it's just, self-pollinating, then you can get a plant that's exactly like the plant that you grew. You have to keep some of them apart, but some plants are easier to manage than others and don't need as much space between them. And again, a hybrid seed will revert to one of the parents, and so you don't know what you're going to get in the process. Seedsavers.org is an organization that sells seed, but they also are a member organization. You can join and share seeds with other people. You can learn about all kinds of things to do with saving seeds. So this website is a great place to go. There's endless articles and information. We usually recommend people start with the easier crops if you've never done it. So these beans, lettuce, oops, that's supposed to say pea, and tomato are all pretty easy to do. They're self-pollinating. They don't require much isolation. Know how your plants develop and how they get pollinated. Is it wind pollination? Is it an insect? And that will help you to manage it. And then you need to know when that seed is actually going to be mature. So for instance, people like to grow quinoa in this area. You can eat the greens of it, amaranth, same way. And those seeds are great to harvest because they're full of proteins and great to use for food, but they are long enough to the seed stage in the Northwest that sometimes we get into wet weather. And so you have to be aware of how long the maturity for the plant is and then go beyond that. So days to harvest are going to be shorter than days to harvest seed. And then you have to know what method you need to use. So just briefly, there's the dry seed process, which is sort of one of the easier ones. You can let things, say you have a bean tent full of green beans and you want to save some of those seed, and you have a bunch of vines that grow to the top of the tent and you can't get there to harvest them. So you harvest all the green beans that are low on the tent for green beans all summer, and you let all the top ones dry. And then when you go to take the bean tent down in the winter or in the fall, you have all these dried seed pods. and you can collect them all. And now you have your dried seed. You have to let them lay out for a little while, the little beans that you harvest, the seeds, to dry fully. But you can, this super easy method of collecting seed from them. Some things like the poppy that we saw in that first picture, they're really easy because they just dry like that. You know, before you know it, you've got these dry seed pods. They actually have little holes in the base of the pod, or in the center of the pod, that if you tip it over, all the seeds fall out. So you want to be careful to keep them upright so you don't lose them. You can put a paper bag over them and tip it and cut it. And that's usually what I do. You'll know they're ready because the pods should be brittle. They should break apart. And you want to plan ahead, like I said, to avoid that rainy season. Sometimes things like lettuce, you're going to sacrifice your best plant. You won't eat it because as it goes to seed, it's going to get bitter, and it's also going to get dried out, and you will just end up with just a seed plant. When you're doing a dry method, sometimes you have to thresh them to get the rest of the seed coat off, and do some winnowing to get the chaff out, you know, to clean them. Yarrow is one of those things that does that. I gave up on that with yarrow. I don't worry about it. I've tried all kinds of different little screens, but I just collect it as is, and then I just sprinkle it in the top of a pot of soil and add a little soil over the top, and there's a little chaff in there with it that just decomposes as the seeds germinate. Works fine. And then there's this wet seed process. In some cases, you're fermenting things. The fermentation process helps to get the goop that's around the seeds to break down so you can actually rinse it off and get to it. So there's like these clumps of seeds that are in this gel, and you're trying to get that loose. And other plants don't have as much of that. Tomatoes are one of those that tend to have that goop, but a lot of people don't do that either. There's lots of different success stories with this. You can learn more about both the wet and dry processes at the Running Orchards site. They had a pretty good site about showing people what to do. And these are just some ideas of, you know, the kinds of things you can save. And then you want to store your seeds properly. So you want your seeds to be cool and dry. Some people employ little mini refrigerators for this use. You just keep them in the 40-degree range. You need them to be in something that's rodent proof because, you know, in a garage or even in your house, potentially things can get to them, especially in the garage though. And get involved with local seed libraries where you guys can exchange seeds with each other. You know, your local gardening group. The Woodmont library actually has a public garden, and they have created a seed library where they're using, I don't think this is a picture from their site, but they are using old card catalogs to store their seeds just like this. And then the King County Seed Library, seed lending library, has multiple locations. The Finney Ridge location is the biggest. And at the moment, we're in discussion with the folks who manage that, who want Tilth Alliance to take over oversight of it. It would be still a collective of different seed libraries that we would just help to provide infrastructure for. And then this is us. So our program is the Garden Hotline. We are at Tilth Alliance. We manage the program. It's a program that's sponsored by Seattle Public Utilities, Hazardous Waste Management in King County, the Rainwise program, and Cascade Water Alliance. And they give us funding in order for us to have all this free advice for folks and help talk to you about doing gardening naturally in the King County area. So that's what I got.
Beautiful job, Laura. Thank you so much. I know I'm getting inspired to get into the garden.
I got my onions and lettuce out and one little thing of peas, and I have some more peas that I'm actually starting in a little clam shell that had salad or something in it. I reuse those a lot to start seeds in because they're self-contained little greenhouses until you're ready to open them and let the tops grow up. Super nice.
Oh, it's like, yeah, it's like its own little garden box.
It is. And it's free because I already paid for it.
Exactly. Yeah, so folks, stuff from our deli, you can reuse those containers.
Mhm.
Oh, Mary said, thanks so much for the great information. Penny said,
And
thank
who
you.
was it that was saving seeds for years? I'd love to
Oh,
hear anything you want to share with us.
Well, my name's Penny Friedman, and I cannot open a green pepper or a jalapeno without saving the seeds. I'm sorry, I'm just OCD about it. So I have bags and bags and bags of them. I need to plant them and start growing them.
Yeah, well, you could save some of those with the seed library. So that one down the Woodmont Seed Library, the library, that would be an option, to just share. And there are in the winter, I don't know if there's any more happening, but there are often seed swaps that go on that you can get involved in and take your stuff too. So I'm curious if you're taking stuff from the grocery store, and often those are varieties that aren't like necessarily grown in the Northwest, they're grown in California or other places, but they do okay for you still?
Are you talking to me, Penny?
Yeah, yep. Mm-hmm.
No, everything I have comes from Marlene's Deli. I just live really close to them, and I've been shopping there for over 30 years. So all my plants are from Marlene's Deli. They're all organic, and
Mm-hmm.
wherever they get them.
Yeah, oftentimes things like the bell peppers that we buy in a grocery store in the Northwest are from California. But there are things that as long as they're short to harvest, you're going to produce fine. But it sounds like you're doing fine with them. That's great.
Well, I've never planted any of them. My home in Auburn is a lot of shade in the back, so I can only grow vinca and hosta. And
Gotcha.
yeah, and so but up north in Whatcom County, where I'm hoping to you know, I remember you had that
Yeah.
one program, yeah,
Yep.
the making the wreaths.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so I think gardening is a lot of work, and it seems like I put a lot of water into my flower beds and things like that. And what anytime I've ever tried to grow, like usually my growing vegetables is very simple. It's like, a few items, and it seems like I put in a lot of watering, and for just a handful of, a produce. So it's like I want to grow plants and herbs, even if it's simple. I think if you just start simple and master it, maybe later you can add more. But
Mm-hmm.
I, I'm never really, I've been trying for over 30 years. I used to go to the pea patch in Auburn. They used to have a pea patch when I first moved in. We always go down there and grow stuff, and a ton of work and didn't get anything.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I'm good at
I
growing
think you're
flowers
right.
and stuff like that. I'm good at growing flowers and things like that, but I'm just not very good at vegetables.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Picking, starting slowly, and anybody doing it new, like what we always recommend is, what do you like to eat the most? Is that practical to grow in the Northwest? Pick the easiest thing that you like a lot, and then you're successful, and then you feel like, oh, I can try something new. Um,
I,
lettuce is super easy to grow here. So that's like always a no-brainer for me. And I grow it every year because
but I really appreciate that it goes down to 30 degrees. It can be pretty cold, and I do.
exactly.
I'm using a lot of lettuce wraps now instead of, bread and crackers and stuff. And
Mhm.
I love salad. So, and I like the dark green and all the weird varieties. So
Mhm.
should really get into lettuce. And then I think my other two main staples are zucchini and green peppers. I love them. I put them in everything, and I got to master those.
Yeah. So I see Dawn, you are asking, are there any edible landscape artists that anyone would recommend in the Kitsap County? Do you mean somebody who would like build a garden as an artist type?
Feel free to unmute yourself. if you'd like.
Yeah, if you're talking, oh,
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Um,
we can.
Just someone that would help create a plan, not necessarily implement it.
Yeah. The best place probably to look is there's the Washington State Nursery and Landscape Association group. And that will have, people that are doing design work all over the state. You could find somebody on that list, I'm pretty sure.
Okay, do you have a web address for that?
I don't. It's WSNLA dot org maybe, but WSNLA as a Google search should bring it up.
Okay, great.
I'm gonna just look
Is
real
it-
quick.
Is it the Washington Association of Landscape Professionals?
Yep.
Or is it a different one?
Yep.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
Yep. So they have people that are certified. They do a certification program for horticulturists, and then they also, have people who are design focused. What you would want to look for is a landscape designer versus a landscape architect. Landscape architects are generally doing sort of bigger projects, and they do a lot of like hardscape infrastructure type work, and they're working for the city of Seattle. And you're looking for a designer that's going to do home-based kinds of projects.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great questions. Love it. Any more questions? Well, we have our wonderful expert here. And
Elizabeth, will you put that YouTube? I was writing it down and I lost it. For the PowerPoints and the resources.
oh yes, so yes, this presentation will be viewable on our YouTube channel, and here's the link.
Okay.
And also Laura's previous classes are also on there as well. And just so everyone knows, Laura is going to be speaking every other month with us for topics on seasonal gardening. So if you hop onto our website, you can register ahead of time, and we would love to have you with us.
Market Deli online. Okay, yeah, this is great. Thank you, Laura. It was really, really good. You have a wealth of knowledge.
I've been gardening, I'm going to date myself here. I've been gardening for 50 years in the Northwest since I was a teenager. So, that was like my first job was weeding for the neighbors. And then I just went from there. I love plants. My whole family was always interested in plants. My grandmother, grew, she was from Arkansas and she grew in Tennessee, and she grew tons of food, and we didn't live in places where she was able to do that very much, but when she could, she did. She also took us blackberry picking when she lived with us here in Seattle. And, she figured out real quick where all the best blackberry patches were and she trooped down there with us with all our cans. And, so she really instilled sort of a love of, like produce and growing things. And then I had my best friend's mother was a horticulturist just by hobby, who was like breeding rhododendrons, and she carved out a hillside behind her house and grew things and blueberries, and I learned so much from her.
Wow.
Amazing, to have these women in my life that were like just naturals at it like that. So it's fun, and there's so much stuff I don't know. That's the thing. It's like there's some things I haven't, done as much with than others, but we're learning a lot, even in our culturally relevant Plant Start program. Part of the work we're doing is sort of experimenting with things that are for warmer climates and seeing what they do here. And we're working with a group called the Experimental Farm Network that has been breeding, hybridizing avocado trees. And we are getting 4 of them for our little collective of growers that I work with the King Conservation District, Living Well Kent, and Seattle University. All are working with TILF on this program. And we're going to try these avocado trees, and see what they do. We're ideally supposed to plant them outside. I'm kind of shy to do that. I feel like, I want to put it in the greenhouse, but we'll see. Once they're they're almost ready to come to us, and we're going to try that out and see what happens. We're experimenting.
That's wonderful. I really want to create 2 compost boxes, at both houses, and I can't seem to find something that will work. So maybe next time down the road, we can talk about how to create and build a compost box.
Yeah, we have a lot of information on the Tilt Alliance website about composts, and there's bin plans there. You can also just call the hotline and talk to us directly about that, and we can sort of, custom advise you for your situation, what you want to compost, what you have, where you can put things. Some people do compost bins with like Rubbermaid. We have a plan for like 2 Rubbermaid totes that you stack inside of each other. The top one has drainage holes that go into the catch into the bottom one, and you can put that in places like your basement, or some people like Jeanette Brizendine used to work with the City of Federal Way, and she kept a square, they call them worm factories. They're like plastic trays that are stacked, and they're 1 foot by 1 foot wide. And so she kept one behind her desk, and nobody ever knew it was there, and she would compost her food scraps in it. And it worked, and it doesn't smell if you do it right. And she was growing worms in her office. So.
Oh my gosh.
That is spectacular.
Well, I take a lot of stuff to the Bow Lake transfer station, a lot of leaves and grass. I mean, I'll fill up 8 huge black yard waste bags. And I'm like, why? Why am I doing this? Why aren't I putting all these leaves and grass into a compost bin with all my vegetables and making my own compost?
You can do it. When you're mixing yard waste and food waste, you want to just be sure that you're doing it properly, because food waste is going to attract rodents. But you can bury them into the bins, or you can have like a separate system for the food waste and just do yard waste in an outdoor bin.
Well, can't you have a really great, I have this wonderful lid that's all wired that no rodents can get in there, but it'll let sunlight and air and moisture, and
Sure.
it will allow
Yeah.
bugs. And so I think if I'm looking into wood and making sure there's a really good lid on it. And I mean, the rodents will chew through plastic like crazy, but I don't know, they're going to have to work really hard to get through the wood.
Right. And they do, and they will get through wood eventually, but especially as it gets moist and it's softer. But wire, you can cage things in wire too, and just like tack hardware cloth around a woodworm bin, and they can't get in.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, and so that's what I want to do, is start a couple of those, one at each place, and yeah, that'll be great. I just, compost isn't that expensive. I buy it at Grow Source. It's $30 for a whole truckload, but I would just love to not have to take stuff to the Bow Lake transfer station. I would just like to not have to take it up there. It's a lot of work. I'd rather just throw it in a big, huge wooden box right here at home.
Yep.
Okay,
Good
great.
practice.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, any more questions, folks, while we have our presenter here? We just so you know, we have a free online class at noon about manifestation. So if y'all are wanting to learn more, I know it's not gardening, but it's still wonderful information.
Elizabeth, the YouTube site, in a couple days it'll be there?
Yes, it'll be there in a couple of days.
Okay,
So if you subscribe, you'll get a little notification once I upload it.
Okay, so I got to go into the website and subscribe.
Yes, that's definitely recommended. And then you can stay in touch with all of our classes as I upload them.
Nice. Wow, that's wonderful. That's great. I'd like to listen and not have to write like a banshee every time.
Yeah.
Even though I did take 1 whole page of notes.
Good. Great.
Okay. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you, Penny.
You too.
Okay, see you soon. Bye.
Bye. right. And we're going to say goodbye to our Facebook Live friends. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful, happy spring. And definitely stay tuned for more wonderful classes from Laura at the Garden Hotline.
Hey, thank you. Thanks, Elizabeth. Nice to see you again.